Modern tools can save you time and money, like online quoting, payment options, policy info, and more. That's Arrowhead Exchange. Arrowhead, we have program management down to a science.
Federal and state privacy laws and contractual requirements are driving interest and demand of privacy breach coverages, and carriers are making sure they can respond appropriately. In this video with MyNewMarkets.com Associate Editor Amy O'Connor, Michael Carr, Senior Vice President, E&O Underwriting for Argo Pro, spoke about how contractual and regulatory requirements are changing the way insureds and carriers look at these policies.
For professional service firms, contractual requirements are becoming a lot more common. So if you have a business where you're handling claims on behalf of someone or enrolling people in benefits, the contract is now not just going to require E&O, it's going to require some kind of privacy coverage. For other sorts of firms, I think regulatory activity has actually pushed this a lot. With the high-tech extensions to HIPAA, you now have direct regulatory exposure for not only the healthcare providers, but for their vendors. You now have more aggressive enforcement because the state attorneys general can now bring actions. The state laws are getting beyond data breaches into more areas where they can take action. And I think that's the stuff that's getting people concerned. With the federal privacy breach laws that have been drafted, the big controversy right now is about whether they'll preempt the various state laws, which run the gamut in terms of what they apply to. In other words, in some states, if the records were encrypted, you don't need to notify. In some states, the breadth of what records apply to the law are much greater. And there are interest groups that want to see the federal law replace all of those different state requirements, but you're also seeing groups, mostly on the consumer side, who don't want to see people lose protection that they have today. I'm not a regulatory affairs guy. I don't have a really good pulse on what's going to happen, especially having had an election this week, but that's certainly out there. There's also a lot of federal regulatory activity going on. The Federal Trade Commission is starting to look more at issues involving data collection. So not necessarily breach-driven, but you have a business where you collect information on consumers, patients, people who use your mobile app or your game and are selling that or sharing that. That's becoming an area of greater scrutiny, and specifically around, do you disclose your practices? Are your actual practices consistent with what you say in your disclosure, and do you get consent? And I think that's been more a European approach in the past. We're seeing a lot more of it here now. A lot of the products now include regulatory coverage and have for the last several years. I think you're seeing a lot more interest in buying higher limits there. When regulatory first came out, as with a lot of these coverages, it was sublimited. You're now seeing people, much more forcefully looking for higher limits or full limits for their regulatory coverage. And like a lot of carriers, we're offering that now. I think there's been a lot of interest in, as I said, expanded regulatory coverage, both for the cost to respond to the regulatory investigation, where you're going to have the same needs you would if you were sued. You're going to need lawyers, you'll need forensics people, you'll need other kinds of consultants, but also breach mitigation services, and looking for not only more limits, but maybe some flexibility. When these coverages first came out, credit monitoring was kind of the solution of choice. And certainly if your name and social security number are compromised, that's probably a very good solution. If, on the other hand, I get into your medical records, I don't get your social, but I do get your medical insurance information, and to use and say the kind of medical identity theft where I get medical treatment pretending to be you, you're not in any particular risk of the kind of financial identity theft that credit monitoring will help you with. But you may have an electronic medical record in your name somewhere that's got false information in it. And in that case, maybe you need a service to help you identify and work through restoring those records. So I think people are looking for a little bit more flexibility than we as an industry brought in the past. You're certainly seeing also a lot more interest around data restoration and business income coverages, not only from people who earn a lot of money on the web, but from people who depend on their networks for supply chains and for vital business records.